NFC South Predictions, Alex, our final division predictions podcast episode. Let's start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a team that I think surprised some people last year. They've had some success, and I think they found at least a short-term answer at quarterback with Baker Mayfield. He's kind of resurrected his career here in Tampa Bay. Now, they've had maybe one of the quietest off seasons of any of these teams in the NFC South, but I don't think that necessarily means that the defending division champs are on any type of decline here.
That's funny to say Tampa Bay, led by Baker Mayfield, NFC champs. But alas, this is where we are. So that's not a shot at Baker, but that's a shot at Baker. I mean, they were able to re-sign. There was a lot of talk about losing Mike Evans over the offseason, but they did retain
Yep.
him. We saw Trey Palmer come alive last year. They drafted John McMillan, and now you get Chris Godwin back healthy. So that receiver room is looking up, led by the veteran Mike Evans. Tristan Wirfs, their stalwart at left tackle. It's kind of really much of a remake and a reshift of that offensive line. So we'll have to see how good they are. Tight end, I don't know. And alas, forever, I think for the last, I would say since Brady, basically for the last 3 years, they've had the worst rushing offense in the league. Like I think last year they only averaged about 75, 76 yards a game, and that's terrible. Enter Bucky Irving, but he had fumbling issues, and then maybe Rashard White, they start to use him a little bit more. So maybe things are taking an uptick there. Defensively, Vita Vea, love that guy at nose tackle, gets a lot of push up the middle. They did there's a little bit of reshaping going on there at the linebacker position. They are running a 3-4 this year, not the typical 4-3. So they switched to a 3-4. I'm kind of happy to see a Yaya Diaby, a quick, fast edge rusher. Needed to get stronger at the next level. It's his time to shine. So hopefully he can get a little bit better. They did make some moves and shifts in the defensive backfield. They come back with two brand new cornerbacks in Zion McCollum and Tyke Smith, a rookie that they just drafted this year, but Antoine Winfield Jr. and Jamal Dean are still there. They did keep one, Jamal Dean. But I don't know what I feel about this team. I think they have a good nucleus, but they're not sneaking up on anybody this year, right? Let's just say that they're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. I think they're still going to be a strong team, but I have them going 10-7, but I'm really pushing towards 9-8. I can imagine, and I know you'll tell us in a minute, Brad, what that over under is. So I'm probably on the over, but you know what? As I'm writing it down, I'm gonna push down to 9-8 for them this season.
Yeah, 9-8. I could see it. I mean, this is a team. I think Carlton Davis, losing him at corner, definitely hurts a little bit. I think he was a little bit of an underrated player. I love Dean, though. I think he is a very, very good corner. I'm glad they were able to keep him. I thought drafting Graham Barton was a nice pick, a very solid pick. I like that they also added an offensive guard. Bringing in Randy Gregory on the edge is interesting because I think their front seven could be pretty good. And look, safety Antoine Winfield Jr. Look, this guy has become one of the best safeties in the game. I think there's still a lot of talent on this team. It maybe not the flashiest, right? It's not a team that necessarily you get super excited about. You don't think of them as being like a title contender, but in the NFC South, I think this is still a team that can maybe compete here and be in the mix once again this year. Let me see what the projected win total is for this team. I should have had it in front of me, Alex, but let me pull this up. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers over under season win total is 7.5, according to Vegas.
Wow. I could see that. And just to let you know, Randy Gregory never reported for camp, so he didn't make the team. So I don't know what's going on
Oh,
with him. So maybe he gets himself. Hopefully he's not kind of falling off the wagon. We know there was some earlier issues in Dallas, and then it didn't go too well in Denver once he left Dallas. So he never even reported for camp. So he's still currently a free agent as is right now. But yeah, I'm gonna stick with 9-8. What did
yeah,
you have for them, Brad?
I need to update. I need to update my notes. Yeah, I forgot to look into that. Yeah, here's the thing. Like I said, I still think that the offensive line is going to be better. And I think because of that, we're going to see Baker Mayfield playing some of his best football right now. I still like these wide receivers. I like the talent there. And I think the defense has enough pop that they can get after some quarterbacks on the other side of the ball. I'm going to take the over, Alex. I'm going to go over the 7.5. I think this team can win 8 or 9 games and possibly be right back in the mix to win the NFC South again.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I have them at, yeah, I'm going to stick with, I had them at 10, but you know what? That last look right before I said it, I'm going to put them at 9 and 8.
All right. Let's jump to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, this is the team that it seems like everyone is circling to be the favorite to now win this division, because on paper, they've solved their biggest issue. And that, of course, was the quarterback room. We know Desmond Ridder was not the answer. We know Arthur Smith was not the answer at head coach. So now you bring in new coach, new quarterback, with a team that's drafted a lot of really talented playmakers the last couple of years, with Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. All these guys that we've kind of been waiting to be unlocked by better play calling and unlocked by better quarterback play. What do you make of this team? And look, we've talked a lot about the Penix draft pick. I don't know if we necessarily need to go down that road, because
No, not at
we
all.
both thought that was the most baffling draft pick. We've talked about it. Go back and listen to our old stuff if you want to hear that. But on paper, I think we know that it's going to be Kirk Cousins' team in the short term. So
Yeah.
what do we make of him taking over with all these young playmakers and a different head coach coming in Raheem Mostert, a guy who's really known for his defensive play calling, a former defensive coordinator, and really great on that side of the ball? Can he finally get this? Excuse me. Can he finally kind of get this defense playing at a higher level? A team that's really struggled to get after quarterback, and can the offense find new life here with different play calling and different play design, running a more of a Shanahan McVay style of offense this year?
Well, the first thing I'll start with is kind of at the top, like we always talked about, like you said, the hierarchy, ownership, GM, coach, and quarterback. I think they have all of those in alignment right now. Even they doubled down on the quarterback like we spoke about already. So you now have Kirk Cousins. You have the guy that I wanted for the Raiders offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, coming over, who's going to unlock. And I think the key word here is for this team is unlocking, right? Because they have a lot of guys. Bijan Robinson was the top running back in his draft. Kyle Pitts was the top tight end in his draft. Drake London was the top wide receiver in his draft. And all three of those guys have yet to be unlocked. And I think this is the year with this coaching staff, specifically Zach Robinson, and everybody should have been on board drafting everything out of Atlanta at the skill position, the top of the edge of the skill positions. And Kyle Pitts, we should get 1,000 yards from Kyle Pitts in 7 to 10 touchdowns. Drake London should have 1,200 yards and 7 to 10 touchdowns. Bijan Robinson should have a total of 1,800 to 2,000 total, 1,800 or more total yards and 10 plus touchdowns this year offensively. Now, they did bring in Rondale Moore, who would have been really good in the slot position, but he's currently on injured reserve. So maybe there's a little bit of a gap until he's back in full circle with that team, so that you can unlock and see everything. Because right now it's just Drake London, Darryl Mooney. They're kind of thin at the wide receiver position, which brings up another thought that I had, and why Hunter Renfro's not signed, I don't know, but we'll get to that later. They came in with one of the better I believe they had a top 10 offensive line last year, but I think the biggest things on this team is the defense. Now, Raheem Morris, we know what he specializes in. He's a defensive coordinator, yes, but he specializes in the defensive backfield. So what do? They already had Jesse Bates. They already have AJ Terrell. They go and they also get Justin Simmons. So now you have both safeties covered, and you have a top three safety at each position, wherever you want to slot them, 1, 2, or 3. Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates, and you have a lockdown corner that they just sewed up in AJ Terrell. Now they did lose Jeff Okuda last year, but he kind of revitalized his career in Atlanta last year, so he earned his contract, I believe, from Houston, but into Mike Hughes. And they moved the offer, they kicked the offer down to the nickelback. But I think with that defensive backfield, they've had an issue getting a pass rush, and even then they still addressed that. They addressed it in the draft. You bring in somebody, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but you bring in somebody, you bring in the Breland Trice out of Washington. But then you also make the trade for Matthew Judon to finally go along with Grady Jarrett, and we know what type of disruptor of any plays as he was, and they should have won that game against Tampa Bay how many years ago, because he definitely shouldn't have had that defensive foul called against Tom Brady. But now you add Judon, you bring in Breland Trice. Judon is a guy that you have to pay attention to. We know Grady Jarrett is a person you have to pay attention to, but you have those guys in the defensive backfield, and if they're holding just 1 to 2 seconds longer, that's going to give this defense an extra step, an extra second or two to get to the quarterback, whether they catch him or force him out and force bad plays, which is what the Jets defense was all about when they had Antonio Cromartie and Darrelle Revis. That defensive backfield allowed that pressure to get to the quarterback. And it's not always necessarily about getting sacks. It's about getting pressure to me. And I think that's what Raheem Morris is going to be able to do with this team. With all that being said, all the fantasy alerts that I talked about with them, if you haven't drafted, too bad. If you've already drafted, too bad, you're late. But if you haven't, jump on those guys I spoke about earlier. But I have the Falcons. I'm probably on the over, but I have them going 11-6.
Yeah, so Atlanta, yeah, this is an interesting team, and I think Raheem Morris is a guy who can really change the culture here. Like, to your point, I expect this secondary especially to take a big step forward. I think he can generate a pass rush, even if it is more with smoke and mirrors, so to speak, because he's that kind of coach. And I think, unfortunately, I get what you're saying about Brilliant Trice. Good player, more of a project. That's kind of the one big pushback I have with the Michael Penix draft pick. And like I said, won't go too deep into that, but I think that was their opportunity to really get an elite guy, whether it was Latu or one of these other top edge rushers. That really would have been the spot to do it. I understand the whole making the draft pick for the future, so to speak, but it could have helped this team right now, because right now Vegas has their season win total at 9.5 wins. I'm going to take the over. I think this is a 10-win team, possibly an 11-win team, to your point, Alex. I think they win this division. I think Kirk Cousins really is the missing piece to this team. And I think with him and the coaching and the defense all improving, we could see an Atlanta team that maybe makes I take that back. I was going to say makes noise, but when the playoffs show up, Kirk Cousins turns into a pumpkin. Forget all that. So they'll be good in the regular season. Kirk Cousins will crap the bed in the playoffs like he always does, and that'll be the story of the Falcons. Let's move on to the New Orleans Saints here. This is a team that you've said it for a while now. We've talked about this team on some prior episodes this summer. They almost have refused to accept their fate, which was needing to rebuild for, I don't know, 2 or 3 seasons now. They've needed to hit the detonate button and really start over. And somehow they just kept trying to keep what they thought was a contending window open. And it's kind of put them in no man's land. Look, I don't like the direction of this team. I don't like this roster very much. Now, I love their draft pick, Talise Fuaga, a guy that we talked about in our draft episodes out of Oregon State. Awesome tackle, really good player. They bring over Willie Gay. We talked about that on another episode. And a guy that's past his prime, I get it. It adds some value there. But once again, that's the kind of player you add when you think you're a player or two away and they're not. So I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense. Kool-Aid McKinstry in the draft, good player, not enough to really get super excited about, but I understand needing help at corner. Spencer Rattler, of course, was kind of your sleeper quarterback in this draft. Very interesting developmental player. They bring over Chase Young to add some pop to that front seven. But look, I'm just not excited about this team, Alex. I'm really not. It's veteran filled, but that's just a nice way of saying they're old and they're kind of
Hmm.
just past their peak here. What does New Orleans do?
Yeah, and you nailed it when you said I've been talking about this team for over 2 seasons, maybe three, basically since Drew Brees retired. Let's just start there. It was when Drew
Yep.
Brees retired, you had a chance. But however, if you believed in your head coach and Sean Payton, have taken a chance rebuilding Jameis Winston, which he looked like he was for about 7 games until Jameis got hurt. It looked like they were on an upswing and they perhaps was able to revitalize Jameis Winston's career after the 30 for 30. But alas, he got hurt. Sean Payton, quote unquote, retires. So I thought that was a time that you could have hit the button, but they, like you said, they are refusing to hit the button. So I've said for a long time that so right now you have a disgruntled Alvin Kamara, you have wasted money in Jamal Williams, you have Ryan Ramczyk who's about to retire, sans the drafting of Fuaga, Cam Jordan is ready to retire, Marshawn Lattimore you're going to let go of, like you're going to move him next year. You finally got from under Michael Thomas's contract this year, and like I said, Tyrann Matthews more than likely this is going to be his last year, as well as Demario Davis, as they're long in the tooth in that sense. So yes, I think this is the time that they're going to be bad enough that ownership is finally going to say yes, let's hit the. So I think everybody I just named is going to be out the door and you're going to see an entirely new regime come in. I said this hot take before, but I'll say it again. I think around week 8, between 8 and 10, Spencer Rattler will take over this team and they'll start to see what he looks like for the next incoming coach. Because whoever comes in to be the coach of this team is kind of going to have a nice nucleus. They're going to have a solid O-line. Rashid Shaheed is a solid number 2. You have Chris Olave, who's growing to be an emphatic number 1. So if you tell me that you can find you can find a running back anywhere from 2 to 7, and sometimes even undrafted. So if you tell me you can, Spencer Rattler's going to develop a little bit this year. You bring in a coach. Name him, I don't know, whatever you want to name him. You get all those guys retire, or they cut those guys and stop pushing pushing the money forward, as well as Derek Carr being out, next year as well. They should be able to not only reset their team, they should also be able to reset the most important thing, because right now they're sitting at $60 million over the cap. And you can't tell me you're going to go into next year and restructure everybody's contract to do it again. But at last, I don't want to go off on a tangent. I have them going 7 and 10 this year, and this finally being the year that ownership says, you know what, we have to hit the reset button and move it on going forward.
Yeah, I think it's like we talked about. I think it's way overdue. I think this is the year where it finally comes off the rails and they're going to be forced to make some decisions that are based on their future and not the present. New Orleans Saints season win total, according to Vegas, their over under is at 7.5. I don't know about you, but I'm going to hammer the under for the Saints. I think this team is bad. I think they're an injury or two away from being really bad. I didn't like what I saw from Derek Carr at all last year. I know he had some mixed results. I don't trust those offensive tackles, and Derek Carr is not a guy that's going to make a lot of plays off script. So I think this team is in some serious trouble, and I don't think it's going to get better before it gets worse. So give me the under here. I think there's a legit chance they finish last in this division, Alex.
Agreed.
Now, the team that everyone thinks will finish last and definitely finished last season, the Carolina Panthers. Look, can they get better? I mean, that's really what it's about here. We're not talking about a team that's very good. We know that they're in really kind of a full rebuild mode here. I don't know what to make of this team, Alex, from the standpoint of I think it starts at the top, like we've always talked about, and I've talked about on the podcast before. There's really 4 pillars to a football franchise, and it starts with the ownership, the GM, the coach, and the quarterback. And I've always said the more pillars you have in place out of those 4, the closer you are to a Super Bowl team. Well, I don't know if this team has any. And that's where the big question mark lies with this team. But it starts at the top. We know the ownership group is a joke, and it's really turned this franchise into a joke. I think the only thing, if you're a Panthers fan, you're really holding on to hope that you see flashes of Bryce Young looking like a franchise guy. That's
Well,
really all you can ask for this year. I don't think it's about wins. I don't think it's about anything else. Just can Bryce Young look like a guy you can build around?
yeah, so they've lost 47 games in the last. Am I saying that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They lost 44 games in the last 6 years. I took a beat for everybody else to
Brutal.
take a beat on what I just said. So you have that. They haven't won more than 7 games since 2017. Even my Raiders have won more 7 games more than that, and we suck right now. So, but uh, I don't have a lot of hope for this team. We kind of talked about them a little bit in pre-production. You missed out on the trade for Brian Burns with the Rams when they wanted to give you for 2 first-round picks. You trade him to the Giants. You let go of Jeremy Chin, who's a guy that could play the slot, that could play safety, that could play corner. You traded Dante Jackson, excuse me, Dante Jackson for Deontay Johnson from the Steelers. You let Frankie Louvu go, who when Shaq Thompson got hurt showed that you drafted a great guy. Even though you let Brian Burns go, you should have had the money to at least keep one to two of those guys, especially if you let Brian Burns go, who was going to be who was a guy that got paid at the top end of the edge rusher salary cap with the Giants. So you should have had enough money to pay Jeremy Chin, retain Jeremy Chin and Frankie Louvu from my perspective. So this all tells me, and like you said, let's go to the top of the food chain there, and David Tepper, who's, people like to talk about Jerry Jones. At least Jerry Jones is actually trying to win. I don't know what David Tepper is trying to do at this moment, because it seems, and as we say a lot of times with the billionaires, it's another toy, and he's playing with the toy but doesn't know how to play with it properly. All due respect, because I'm pretty sure most people will hand him and his firm their money the way he knows what he's doing at. But this is a little bit different here. I think there's a little, we've heard, even going back to what was that last year when the coaching staff wanted CJ Stroud, but he fought for that trade where they traded everything away. And we can include DJ Moore in that going away. And we can include Christian McCaffrey going away for that. And everything that they did just to get Bryce Young, even though Christian McCaffrey was a part of really DJ Moore, and the picks, allowing Chicago to be in the position that they're in. If you just take a look at the Carolina Panthers depth chart and you look at the Chicago Bears depth chart and the moves that they've made, you're talking about two teams going in opposite directions right now. I personally do not think that Bryce Young is a bad quarterback. I think he's a victim of circumstance. And as we always talk about quarterbacks, a lot of it, everybody's not Peyton Manning just because they're number one pick. Wherever he goes, he himself was going to be good. That doesn't mean team success, but he was going to be a good player. A lot of guys coming in still need more developing, and Bryce Young is no different. We talked about his height and everything, but I think the guy can play football. They've tripled down on the wide receiver position. They drafted Chuba Hubbard 2 years ago. They signed Miles Sanders last year, and then this year they drafted arguably the best running back in the draft in Jonathan Brooks, even though he's hurt. And now Chuba Hubbard steps into the starting position. They traded back up into the first round just by one spot to get Xavier Leggett, a guy who I think is an athletic freak and is big in the TO mold, if you will, but he's pushing to get into the starting lineup. On a team like this, he should be able to start right away. He's right now second strings behind Jonathan Mingo. Hopefully he gets a chance to start only because I drafted him. The offensive line, they did a lot of moving and shifting around there because even though Bryce Young wasn't good, that offensive line wasn't good as well. And then we spoke about it. I'll just run through it briefly. The defense is kind of in shambles a little bit. Shaq Thompson is coming off of I believe either Achilles or a knee injury, so it's going to take him a year. DJ Johnson is a flyer, a guy that can run around the field with that 4.5 speed that I think he has, but he kind of doesn't take the right angles. He doesn't know where he's going, so perhaps he gets coached up. And then the signing of Jadeveon Clowney. Yes, you bring him back close to home, but Jadeveon Clowney is now a mercenary. The only people that should be signing Jadeveon Clowney are teams like San Francisco, a team like Philly, if you may, or a team like Detroit that are in the Super Bowl bubble, because he is a mercenary. When he's unmotivated, you get a lot of the bad of Jadeveon Clowney. Great player, but that motor has always been his problem throughout his career. And I mean, there's not really too much to talk about other than that. JC Horn is a player that I like that actually came out of South Carolina as well, but oft injured. So I don't know what this team is. I don't know. I think they've gotten better in terms of weapons in the offensive line, but I still see this team as a 3 to 4 win team. And as of right now, I have them going 3 and 14 and being at the top end of that draft. And if I was David Tepper, I would kind of stay out of this and let Dan Morgan do his job because they need to trade that pick because they need a lot of help all over this team, all over this depth chart. Because right now it's Derek Brown and some guys that we hope are going to be able to step up. That's not a shot at Shaq Thompson. He's just coming off injury. But I will say one bright spot perhaps on this team, maybe Jatavion Sanders, the kid out of Texas, can work his way up to a starter because I think he could be a good player and a nice weapon for a quarterback that's struggling, still going into his second year.
Yeah, it's interesting because the defense was really the only thing that this team had going for them, and they gutted this defense. Like you said, they just lost all their best players. You could argue they lost their 3, maybe 4 best defensive players
Absolutely.
on this
Yes.
team, and it hurts. But the one bright spot, so to speak, is that they address the offense. To your point, they've really tried to upgrade the offensive line to protect Bryce Young. They've tried to give him some more weapons. They really have invested a lot to try to get something out of this first overall pick. But here's the one name that I don't know if anybody's talking about, or maybe not talking about enough, and it's probably the biggest addition they made this entire offseason. Dave Canales comes over to help bring along Bryce Young. This is a guy that came from the Pete Carroll tree. This is a guy who's worked with other quarterbacks and helped really reignite the careers of a guy like Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith, guys that we saw that were kind of really on their way out of the league and suddenly revitalized their careers and got them playing much, much better football. So I hate to use the term quarterback whisperer, so to speak, but he's really been known as a guy that can kind of help rebuild and revitalize quarterbacks. If he can do that here with Bryce Young, because quite frankly, I think Bryce Young, the lack of success, and you have to wonder if this kid, if his confidence took a hit at all from the rough season that he went through and all the negative reports that he had to hear coming from the media, the social media, and the fans. Can he get something out of this kid? I think that was a great hire on paper. And I think giving this guy some pieces, once again, it really comes down to forget the wins, losses. They're not going to be good. We know that. For Panthers fans, it's all about Bryce Young. Can this kid show you that he's a young franchise quarterback? Now, for the wins, losses part of this, because we do a prediction for every team, the Carolina Panthers win total, season win total over under is, according to Vegas, 5.5 wins. You're taking the under.
Definitely.
I'm taking the under too. I'm taking the under here too. I think this is a 3 or 4 win team again, unfortunately. And I think once again, if the offense can show some improvement, if Bryce Young can show some improvement, then forget the wins because that would be a big enough win, I think, for Panthers fans. But to your point, I think, unfortunately, this is a team that's going to be drafting high in the draft again and continuing this rebuild.
So before we close, Brad, let me ask you a question. Bryce Young has a bad year. He doesn't look good again. They're sitting at the top of the draft. Are you going to and plus everything that you said is true, but does David Tepper also have the patience to wait for that to develop and see everything play out? But let's just say it's a bad year. Shador, Quinn Ewers, Carson Beck, whoever you want to name, is sitting there. Do you think they have the wherewithal to stay patient with Bryce Young, or do you think they pull the trigger and go after one of those quarterbacks?
See, that's fascinating because let's say hypothetically they're the number 1 pick. If they're the number 1 pick and they're getting all kinds, they're going to be getting all
Of
kinds of
course,
calls.
yeah, absolutely.
And depending on what they're offered, there's a lot of variables here. But I will say this: if Bryce Young is terrible, let's just put it that way. Let's say he's absolutely terrible. I think you would have to consider it. I really do. I think at that point it would be 2 years where he doesn't look like the guy, and you'd have to wonder, okay, is it too soon to maybe hit the reset button? The only downside to this that really is going to come back to bite them is once again that trade with Chicago, because look, I like Carson Beck. I like Shador Sanders. I like Quinn Ewers. I think this quarterback class is pretty solid. There is no Caleb Williams in this draft class.
Right.
So there's no on paper home run, if you want to use the term generational type player. There's just not a guy like that in this class. So are you really going to blow this up to take another flyer, so to speak, on a guy like a Carson Beck or a Shador or Quinn or maybe somebody else that emerges here? Because there's always someone, a Jackson Dart.
Right.
Look, all good prospects, but very risky, very risky. But if there's one thing I do know is that Tepper has shown impatience with his coaches, with his players, with this team, with his fans throwing stuff in their face. Let's not get into that. But look, this guy is erratic. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they made the wrong decision again. But who knows? I think if you're a Panthers fan, you're just hoping that doesn't have to be the decision. And hopefully that Bryce Young looks like a good enough player that they can take some trades, some trade offers, I should say, and get some more picks and rebuild this team. Guys, that is going to do it for our prediction episodes, our division prediction episodes, guys. If you haven't seen the first 4 divisions we did, those are exclusively on the audio version of the podcast. Go back and check those out, or go check out our other videos, of course, on the other division previews we've done exclusively here on YouTube. PGF Nation, we love you guys, and we are out.